After decades of work and millions of dollars, the United States has nearly wiped out a disease called brucellosis. It infects cattle, elk, and bison. Today, most of America's cattle herds are free of infection. But wildlife still harbor the bacteria, and that has the federal government ratcheting up pressure on states to deal with the disease in wild elk and bison. In Wyoming, wildlife managers have launched a controversial experiment on the state's elk herds.
That's why the pressure in Wyoming is we're the last remaining reservoir in the greater Yellowstone area of the entire United States of this disease, and it's the goal of APHIS to rid the United States of that disease once and for all.
Wyoming is now in its third year of a 5-year program to capture, test, and slaughter potentially infected elk. Each winter, the state captures hundreds of elk, draws blood, and looks for antibodies to the disease. The tests only indicate exposure to brucellosis, not an actual infection. So disease experts have to make an educated guess about which animals are most likely to be infected and capable of spreading the disease. So far, the state has captured more than 1,000 elk and sent over 100 of them to slaughter. While state officials hope that thinning the herd will reduce disease, conservation groups oppose the slaughter and have filed a lawsuit to try to stop it. Opponents argue that test and slaughter is too invasive and treats wild animals like cattle. 13 elk have died accidentally while being handled in the traps.
We could end up slaughtering hundreds and hundreds of elk every year, probably forever.
Opponents say there's no way to capture every infected elk, so the disease will always remain in the wild. Making matters worse, the state's practice of artificially feeding elk in the winter helps spread the disease. So opponents say spending thousands of dollars to remove one potentially infected elk is a waste of taxpayers' money and a waste of wildlife. But state officials see the program as a necessary experiment to figure out what can be done about brucellosis in the elk herds.
I'd like to make it very clear, in my mind, and I think in the committee's mind, this is an experiment. We're not recommending this as the solution. We're just hoping to look at this from a research standpoint, and does it even work? We have no idea.
But conservationists contend the test and slaughter experiment diverts attention from the real problem. In northwestern Wyoming, crews feed hay and alfalfa pellets to elk to help them survive the winter. But feeding wildlife has a serious downside. It artificially concentrates animals, which makes it easier for diseases to spread through the herd.
So we've learned that these feed grounds do engender a bigger problem, and that's keeping that disease alive in elk, which threatens two of the greatest resources that the state of Wyoming has, beef cattle and its elk populations.
State officials have no plans to abolish feeding. They say that would result in smaller elk herds. So the state has to prove to the federal government that it's dealing with the disease despite continuing to feed the elk. And that means shipping more test-positive elk to slaughter. For Assignment Earth, I'm Gary Stryker.